There's a letter in the Indiana Historical Society archives, dated March 1827, written by a man named Samuel Pritchard to his brother in Pennsylvania. The letter is cordial enough for most of its length. Crop yields, weather, the health of livestock. But in the final paragraph, the handwriting changes. The letters grow uneven, pressed harder into the page. We are leaving before the thaw. I will not write why in detail, for I do not wish to sound fevered in mind. But I will say this. A man cannot live where he is looked upon each night and never once see who is doing the looking. Eliza will not go near the window after dark. The children sleep in our room now, all four of them, though they do not say why. We do not speak of it, but we are all agreed. By April, we will be gone from this place. The family left in mid-March, weeks before they planned, abandoning a 2-room cabin they'd built with their own hands. Pritchard never returned to southern Indiana. His brother kept the letter, and it was donated to the archive in 1891 by a distant relative who had no memory of why it had been preserved. There were other families along the same stretch of wooded territory, other cabins, set back from the narrow trails that passed for roads in those days. And if you go through the deed records and tax listings of that region, what is now Greene County, you'll find a pattern. Between late 1826 and the summer of 1827, at least 9 homesteads were abandoned. No official cause is listed, no disease outbreak, no conflict with local tribes, who had already been pushed farther west by then. Just empty cabins, fields gone fallow, livestock left behind or sold in haste. No one made a report to the territorial government. No newspaper ran the story. But the land stayed empty for almost 15 years afterward, even though it was fertile, well-watered, and legally available for claim. In 1826, Indiana had been a state for only 10 years. The southern part, near the fork of the White River, was still patchwork. Small clearings connected by trail, homesteads scattered across miles of unbroken forest. Settlers came in waves, most of them from Kentucky or Virginia. Families looking for cheap land and a quiet start. They built their cabins from oak and hickory, chinked the gaps with clay, and cleared just enough ground for corn and squash. It was isolated work. Neighbors might be 2 miles apart, sometimes farther. You saw other people on Sundays, if the weather allowed for travel to the nearest meeting house. The rest of the week, you were alone with your family in the woods. The area in question sat between 2 tributaries, Richland Creek to the north, Mud Creek to the south. Rolling country, dense with beech and poplar. In the summer, the canopy was so thick you could walk in shade all day. In the winter, the trees turned skeletal, and you could see farther than you wanted to. The wind moved differently through bare branches. Sounds carried. The settlers who came to that stretch in 1825 and early 1826 were typical of time. Young families, a few widowed men, 1 or 2 older couples whose children had grown and moved on. They raised cabins within a few months of each other. There was no formal town, no name for the area. People referred to it as the Fork District, or sometimes the Lower Woods. Shared labor was common. A barn raising, a well dug, help with the roof. But each family returned to their own land at the end of the day, and once the sun went down, you were on your own. By all accounts, the first year went well. Crops came in decently. A traveling preacher came through twice. One family, Josiah and Mary Kern, had a child born in December of 1825, a daughter they named Temperance. There were no murders, no thefts, no serious injuries. Life was hard, but it was steady. It wasn't until late summer of 1826 that the first mentions of unease began to appear in written records. A man named Abner Hollis, who lived near the Richland Creek side, wrote to a cousin of Vincennes in August of that year. He mentioned, almost in passing, that his dogs had been acting strangely. Both hounds refused to go past the tree line after dusk. I have tried driving them out with a switch, but they tuck low and slink back to the porch. They are not old dogs, nor sick, but they will not move past the clearing once the light is gone. I cannot account for it. A small thing, but it was the first notation of something being wrong. By September, others had noticed similar behavior. Livestock grew restless near sunset. Horses stamped and pulled at their tethers. Pigs, normally quiet in their pens, began to squeal in the evenings without apparent cause. Chickens roost early and would not leave the coop, even when feed was spread in the yard. It was easy to dismiss at first. Animals were animals. Predators moved through the woods, wolves, panthers, the occasional black bear. The settlers were used to that, but this felt different, according to later accounts. The animals weren't reacting to a specific threat. They were reacting to the time of day. Mary Kern, the woman who had given birth the previous winter, mentioned it to a neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Shadrach, during a Sunday gathering in mid-September. Mrs. Shadrach later wrote about the conversation in a letter to her sister in Ohio. Mary said the baby had been waking every evening just after sundown, crying in a way she had not done before. Not hungry, not soiled, just crying and looking toward the window. Mary said she had taken to covering the window with a quilt, and that the child slept better after. I asked if she thought it was a cold coming in. She said no. She said it was not the cold. Others began covering their windows as well. Not all at once. Not as though they had agreed upon it. But by October, if you had walked past the cabins in that district after dark, you would have seen very little light escaping. Shutters closed. Cloth hung over gaps. Candles in the fire kept low. No one talked about it directly, but they all did it. Abner Hollis wrote again in late October. This time, his tone was different. I have begun to feel as though I am being observed during the evening hours. It is not a feeling I can justify, nor one I have ever experienced in this way before. I am not a nervous man. I have lived on the frontier for most of my life, but when I step out to check the animals at dusk, I feel a pressure at my back, as though someone is standing just beyond the line of sight. I have turned quickly more than once. There is never anyone there, but the feeling does not leave. He was not alone in this. Josiah Kern mentioned it to another settler, a man named Eli Bridger, in early November. Bridger later recounted the conversation in his own journal, which was preserved by his descendants and donated to a county historical society in the 1920s. Josiah asked me if I had felt watched of late. I admitted that I had. He nodded, but did not seem surprised. He said it happened every evening, just as the light began to fail. He said he had started to stay indoors during that time, and that it seemed to help, though he could not say why. I told him I had done the same. We did not speak further on it. The feeling was consistent. It came at the same time, and it was always outside. By mid-November, people had stopped going out after sunset unless it was unavoidable. Tasks were rearranged. What was brought in before dark. Animals were checked earlier. If something needed doing after the light faded, it was often left until morning. This was unusual. Frontier life required flexibility. Work didn't end at sundown, but the settlers in that district began to behave as though it did. Mrs. Shadrach wrote again to her sister in late November. No one has said it plainly, but we are all afraid of the evening. I do not know what else to call it. It is not fear of wolves nor men. It is fear of being seen. I have felt it myself, and it is a deep, cold thing. I no longer go out to the well after the sun is down. I fill every pot and bucket before the light fails. I have begun to feel foolish for it, and yet I cannot stop. The children felt it too. Several families later reported that their children refused to play near the tree line as the days grew shorter. They stayed close to the cabin. They came inside without being called. And at night, many of them asked to sleep nearer to their parents, though they did not explain why. One father, a man named Henry Cutler, mentioned in a letter to a friend of his son, age 7, had told him, "There are too many eyes in the woods now." Cutler did not ask the boy what he meant. He wrote that he had not wanted to know. December brought snow. Not much at first, just a few light falls that melted by midday, but enough to cover the ground in the evenings and make the woods seem even quieter. Sound moved differently in snow. Footsteps became muffled. Branches cracked louder. And in that silence, people began to notice something else. There was sound that did not belong. Not animal sounds. Not the wind. Just movement. Soft and deliberate. Abner Hollis wrote about it in a letter dated December 9th. Last evening, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow and evenly spaced, as though someone were walking perimeter. I took my rifle and opened the door. The snow was undisturbed, but I could still hear the steps, faint, continuing around the side of the cabin toward the back. I followed the sound. There was nothing, no tracks, no sign of man or beast. I stood there in the cold for some time, listening. The steps had stopped, but I had the sense that I was still being observed. I went inside and did not come out again that night. Eli Bridger reported something similar. I woke in the night to the sound of something moving just outside the wall, a slow dragging, like a hand running along the logs. My wife heard it too. We lay still and did not speak. It continued for several minutes, then stopped. In the morning, I checked the cabin. There were no marks, no scratches, nothing to suggest anything had touched it, but we both heard it clearly. Mary Kern's baby began waking every night, always at the same time, just after full dark, always crying toward the window, even though it was covered. Mary mentioned to Mrs. Shadrach that she had started sleeping with the child in her arms, away from the outer wall. Josiah had begun sitting up at night with a rifle across his lap, though he did not say what he was watching for. The neighbors did not ask. By late December, at least 3 families had begun talking quietly about leaving. Not loudly, not in any organized way, but the intention was there. Eli Bridger wrote, "We cannot continue as we are. My wife has not slept properly in weeks. The children are pale and quiet. I have tried to reason through what is happening, but I cannot. There is no logic to it. There is only the feeling night after night that we are being studied, that something is waiting. I do not know what it wants. I do not think I wish to find out. But winter made travel difficult. The ground was frozen. The trails were rough. And so, for a time, people stayed. They endured. They kept their fires burning and their doors barred and tried not to think too carefully about what was happening just beyond the walls. It was during this time, late December, around the winter solstice, that the encounters grew more direct. Henry Cutler's son, the boy who had mentioned the eyes, woke his parents one night in a panic. He said he had seen a face at the window. Not clearly, just a shape, pale and still, pressed close to the glass. His father went outside with a lantern. There was nothing, but in the snow beneath the window, there was a depression, as though something had been standing there for a long time. The snow was compressed and smooth. No footprints leading to it. No footprints leading away. Cutler brought his family inside to the center of the room and kept the fire high until morning. Mrs. Shadrach, sleeping alone in her cabin, reported waking to the sound of breathing outside her door. She described it as slow and steady, just audible over the wind. She did not open the door. She sat in her chair with a knife in her lap until dawn. When she finally stepped outside, there was nothing unusual, but she told her sister later that she had felt certain in that moment that if she had opened the door, something would have been standing there. Not a man, she wrote. I do not know what, but not a man. It was Josiah Kern who had the most sustained experience. The account comes from multiple sources, his own brief mention in a letter written weeks later, a second-hand description from Eli Bridger, and a short entry in the journal of a traveling minister who passed through the area in the spring of 1827 and spoke with survivors. It happened on the night of January 11th, 1827. Josiah had gone out just after sunset to bring in a piece of firewood that had been left outside. It was a small thing, should have taken less than a minute. Mary was inside with the children. The baby was already fussing, as she did every evening now. He stepped onto the porch and immediately felt it, the presence, stronger than it had ever been before. He described it later as a weight pressing on him from all sides. Not physical, but undeniable. The air felt thicker. The cold felt different, not the cold of winter, but something else, something that came from a place without warmth. He turned to go back inside, and that was when he saw it. Not clearly. He was careful to say that in every account. He did not see it clearly. But there was something at the edge of the clearing. Tall, still, standing just beyond the line where the firelight from the window reached. It was not moving, but it was facing him. He could not make out details. The shape was wrong. Too thin in some places, too broad in others. The proportions did not match anything he knew. He thought at first that it might be a tree, a trick of shadow. But trees did not stand that way, and shadows did not watch. He felt its attention, focused, patient, unwavering. For a moment, he considered calling out, demanding to know who was there. But something stopped him, some animal instinct, deep in thought, that told him speaking would be a mistake. So he stood there, and it stood there. The distance between them could not have been more than 30 feet. Josiah later said that he had no sense of how long they remained that way. It might have been seconds. It might have been minutes. Time felt strange. The world felt reduced to that single point of connection. Him on the porch, it at the edge of the trees. And then, slowly it moved, not toward him, sideways. A smooth, gliding motion, as though it were being pulled along a track. It did not walk. It did not step. It simply shifted, moving parallel to the cabin, keeping the same distance, never breaking its focus on him. Josiah's hands were shaking. He reached behind him, fumbling for the door latch. The shape stopped moving. It remained still again, now positioned at a different angle, but still watching. He opened the door and stepped backward into the cabin, not turning his back, not taking his eyes off the tree line. Mary asked him what was wrong. He did not answer. He barred the door, checked the shutters, and moved his family to the center of the room, away from the walls. They stayed that way all night. In the morning, Josiah went outside. There were no tracks in the snow, none approaching the cabin, none at the tree line where the shape had been standing. But there was something else. At the very edge of the clearing, just where the woods began, the snow had been disturbed in a long, even line, as though something had been standing there for hours, shifting its weight slowly back and forth while it waited. The line was 12 feet long. Josiah told Eli Bridger about it 2 days later, and Bridger wrote. He said he would not spend another night in that place. His wife agreed. They began packing that same afternoon. By the end of January, the Kerns were gone. They left most of their possessions behind. Furniture, tools, even a portion of the stored food. They took only what they could carry and made for Bloomington, where Mary had a cousin. They did not file a formal claim release. They simply left. Within 2 weeks, Henry Cutler and his family followed. Then Eli Bridger. Then Abner Hollis. Mrs. Shadrach stayed until early March, longer than most, but she too eventually abandoned her cabin and moved east, back toward Ohio. By April of 1827, the entire district was empty. Not a single family remained. The Territorial Land Office in Vincennes noted the vacancies, but no investigation was launched. Abandoned homesteads were not uncommon on the frontier. People left for all sorts of reasons: crop failure, illness, fear of conflict. The clerks assumed it was something similar and prepared the land for resale. But no one bought it. Not that year. Not for many years after. A few families inquired in the early 1830s, but after visiting the area, they declined to file claims. One man, whose name is recorded only as J. Stevens in a deed office ledger, wrote a note in the margin of his application. Land is good, but I do not like the feel of it. We'll look elsewhere. The cabin stood empty. Some collapsed over time. Others were dismantled by travelers looking for wood. But the clearings remained, and for more than a decade, the area was avoided. A circuit preacher, passing through in 1829, wrote in his journal, "I was told by a man in Bloomington not to camp near the Fork District. When I asked why, he would not say directly, only that the families who had lived there had left in haste, and that the place had a reputation now. I pressed him, but he grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. I did not camp there." In 1841, a new wave of settlers arrived, unaware of the history. They cleared new fields, built new cabins, and established what would eventually become the town of Worthington. The area was absorbed into normal settlement patterns, and over time, the stories faded. But they did not disappear entirely. In the 1890s, a county historian named William Thornton compiled a book of early Indiana settlement accounts. He included a brief section on the Fork District abandonments based on letters and records he had found. He noted, "The families who left that area in 1826 and 1827 did so with unusual urgency and uniformity. No clear cause is documented. When interviewed in later years, survivors were reluctant to discuss it. One woman, believed to be the widow Shadrach, said only, 'We were not wanted there.' That much was made clear." She would not elaborate. Thornton tried to locate more detailed accounts, but most of the original settlers had died by then, and their children knew little. The records that survived were fragmentary. Letters with missing pages, journals with entries scratched out, mentions in passing that led nowhere. The land itself offered no answers. No bodies were ever found. No violence recorded. No artifacts suggesting what, if anything, had driven people away. Just the pattern, the timing, and the silence that followed. There's a tendency, when examining old events, to look for explanations that fit within the boundaries of what we understand. Mass hysteria, shared delusion, misidentified wildlife, gas leaks, though those cabins had no gas, psychological pressure from isolation. These are comfortable frameworks, but they require that we ignore the consistency. 9 families, scattered across miles, experiencing the same progression of unease, the same behavioral changes, the same descriptions written independently, in private letters never meant to be compared. They all felt watched. They all heard movement where there should have been none. They all saw, or almost saw, something at the edge of their vision that did not resolve into anything familiar. And they all left, not because they were driven out by force, but because they understood on some level deeper than reason that they were not alone, and that whatever was sharing that space with them had no intention of leaving. The woods are still there. The land was settled. Eventually, homes were built. Roads were paved. The old clearings are part of farmland now, or reclaimed by force, and no one thinks much about what happened there nearly 200 years ago. But sometimes, when researchers go through old county records, they find notes in the margins, annotations by surveyors or tax assessors, little marks that were never meant to be significant, things like "avoided after dark," or "residents complain of unease 1826," or, in one case, a single line written in faint pencil on the back of a deed transfer from 1828. They are still there. No explanation, no context, just those 4 words, and then nothing more.